We dive into your mailbag questions next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're back with a midweek edition episode, and that means it is our mailbag. These mailbags don't stop throughout the offseason. They're really fun to do, and getting all the responses and the questions that I do get, I like to just get different perspectives on the thoughts of people about this team, where people think they're headed, what improvements they would make, any questions they have about that. So to anybody who has participated in these mailbag questions or in the mailbags and asked the questions, thank you. I really do appreciate it. We have 4 questions here today, so I was thinking of splitting it up. So we'll talk about 2 in the second segment, 2 in the third segment. In the first segment, I wanted to talk a bit about Tom Brady and his retirement and what he ended up posting on his Instagram story about Lamar Jackson, and also a bit about Tyrann Mathieu. Mathieu is an interesting case as a free agent. We'll talk about Mathieu really throughout this entire offseason, at least if he gets signed by the Ravens, definitely. But if not, at least throughout the next couple of weeks here as free agency kind of is creeping up on us a little bit. It's kind of slowly but quickly getting here. So we'll talk about Brady and Mathieu in the first segment. So let's dive into all of that right now. But before we do that, be sure to follow along in audio form if you're here with us in audio form. So that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your audio podcasts. We're Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. That's when our content comes out. But we're also in video form on YouTube. Our first goal is 1,000 subscribers. We are growing every day, and really, it's been amazing. You know, we started off doing this, or at least I did, in audio form about 2.5 years ago. We started video about 5 months ago. So it's been a journey, but it's been one that I've really enjoyed. And now we're in both audio and video form for whichever you prefer. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into our first segment before the mailbag questions. Let's talk a bit about Tom Brady. Now, there was a lot of stuff going on with Tom Brady over the weekend, as it was pretty much announced or reported, that Tom Brady was retiring from the NFL. This happened on Saturday. Adam Schefter put out a report. There were multiple other people who were kind of hinting at it as well. But then the Brady camp comes out and says, there's no decision that's been made here. I don't know what you're talking about. So we have to wait until Tuesday when Brady formally announces the retirement himself. And it kind of sparked a lot of memories. You know, I know for a lot of people, for me included, I mean, I look back and you look at the 2013 AFC Championship game where, you know, Donnell Ellerbe takes that tip pass and kind of basket catches it for an interception. And then Kerry Williams picks off Tom Brady in that same game to kind of seal the Ravens to the Super Bowl, seal that Super Bowl trip. And you could also look to the Ravens in 2019 against Tom Brady when Lamar Jackson really took it to the undefeated New England Patriots at the time, sent them home with their first loss. They played at M&T Bank Stadium. Earl Thomas had an interception in that game, so throwback. But I think there are so many memories that can go along with Tom Brady. And for Ravens fans, it's like Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger retiring in the same offseason. It's like so many triumphant victories and so many devastating defeats that happened at the hands of those two. You know, great memories, sad memories from both of those guys on the football field. And for Brady, you know, he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest football player of all time. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for what he did on the field, how he was able to build that dynasty in New England. But the Ravens, you know, they got the better of him, and Brady got the better of the Ravens. I mean, you can go back to all the clips of Belichick and Brady studying Ed Reed, all the respect that Ed Reed and Brady had for each other, you know, the hatred that these defenses had for each other. Even the New England defense had some key pieces on there that gave the Ravens offense some troubles. It was Joe Flacco versus Tom Brady in those days, and even before Joe Flacco, Tom Brady was doing his thing. So there are a lot of memories associated with Tom Brady, and he left a memory for Ravens fans on the way out, as he was posting just Instagram posts that people have posted about him, just, you know, the congratulations on a great career posts, and, you know, from everywhere. I mean, Calais Campbell put one out. There are reactions from Ravens players. There are a lot of them We have that up on Ravens Wire, actually, if you want to go check out all of them. But Lamar Jackson was one who posted a reaction to Brady's retirement, but Brady actually posted a picture that Lamar Jackson posted himself. He put it on his Instagram story and said, "You're next," with a heart. And it got the attention of many because Brady went out of his way to do this. Lamar Jackson has the utmost respect for Tom Brady. He's said on air that, he wants to be like Brady and be the Brady for Baltimore and stuff like that. So that's one, just a great mindset to have in general from a football perspective. But it was interesting. Well, first of all, I think he did take it down because he spelled "your" the wrong way. He spelled it Y-O-U-R instead of Y-O-U''RE. So it said "you're next" instead of "you are next." But regardless, it was up there. Lamar Jackson reposted it. So it was really nice of him to do that, of Brady to do that, and kind of put that vote of confidence in. It was not about Joe Burrow, not about Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, some of those other young quarterbacks. It was about Lamar Jackson. And that's not me saying that, every young quarterback outside of Lamar Jackson is irrelevant now because Tom Brady posted about Lamar Jackson. That's not what I'm saying, but it was a nice thing to see Tom Brady recognizing Lamar Jackson after Jackson recognized Brady for his really illustrious and phenomenal career. And it goes to show that, the perception of Lamar Jackson within NFL circles, we've heard like the anonymous scouts and all these crazy like reports of, one anonymous GM or one anonymous coach says that he'll be figured out or this, that, and the other. It seems like the players have a real respect for Jackson on the football field. They really like his game. That's what I'm gathering. Now, I'm sure there are some players that don't, and that's whatever, but the comment or the 2 words, or it should have been 3, of Brady were really hit home for a lot of people, and I'm glad he did that. But moving off of Tom Brady, let's move on to a player in Tyrann Mathieu who has been linked to the Ravens for a decently long while now. Now, for me, Mathieu was somebody who I really, really, really wanted back in that 2019 free agency when the Ravens decided to go with Earl Thomas. And, at the time, I wasn't too overly, disappointed, but Mathieu was my number 1 target. And as it turns out, Mathieu was one of the best free agent signings of that class, signed a 3-year deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, had 3 great years with the Chiefs in 2019, 2020, and 2021, but he is now entering free agency once again and doing some pretty open flirting. He's kind of had some mixed comments about his time in Kansas City in terms of if he's going to come back in 2022 or if he wants to come back. He said in a press conference he wants to come back and hopefully he does. But then on Twitter, he's saying, stuff along the lines of, it was great and this, that, and the other. And he even posted, like it was on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, I think, where some and Ravens Instagram account put a Photoshop of him in a Ravens jersey or something and asked what jersey is Tyrann Mathieu wearing next year or something like that. It might not have been, but pretty much Mathieu said, "I'm wearing 21 next year." How good would Tyrann Mathieu look in purple? And he goes, "I'm wearing 21 next year." So yeah, pretty open flirting, whether that's just him saying, "Oh, I'm wearing 21 regardless of who I'm on." And I'm just commenting on a Ravens post because maybe, but at the same time, I don't know. Mathieu's somebody who is a very versatile player, finds himself, around the football a ton, and is a decent tackler, just someone who's very smart. I think that for Tyrann Mathieu, if he were to come to Baltimore, or if he were the guy to come to Baltimore instead of Earl Thomas back in that 2019 offseason, the possibilities could have been endless. Earl Thomas was great on the field for the Ravens for the most part, but we all know what happened off of it. And I think Mathieu, he had his off-field issues at LSU, but he has proven that he is beyond those. He has passed those. He's a very passionate, fiery competitor, something that this Ravens team loves and has had over the course of their franchise history. So I think it'd be a perfect fit, especially the fact that the Ravens, there's uncertainty in their secondary with how's Marlon Humphrey going to look? How's Marcus Peters going to look? Is Anthony Averett going to walk? Is Deshaun Elliott going to walk? How much is Brandon Stevens going to grow in year 2? So I think having a stable veteran presence, a guy like that next to Chuck Clark, who is also kind of a stable veteran presence, will be really nice in the back half of that secondary. So, look, I'm all for Tyrann Mathieu. He's kind of doing the where am I going type thing, but I don't know. He's one of my top tier free agents I would like the Ravens to sign. He's not somebody who, if the Ravens don't sign, I'm going to be like, the season is doomed. I don't think I'm ready to go there. There's not a free agent, I think, where that's the case, and that's what's going to happen. But for me, I think for what this team has in terms of cap space, it's not the least amount of money, but it's not the most amount of money. So you have to kind of look at it in that perspective in terms of how much money, how many resources can you contribute to a guy like Tyrann Mathieu or give to a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, who is not going to come cheap. This isn't going to be like a 1 year, $3 million deal. He's going to ask for multiple years. He's going to ask for probably some big guarantees, maybe some incentives in there as well. I mean, as he should. He's a good football player. So I think that the Ravens, they have some leeway in free agency. It's a matter of who stays, who goes from their own free agents that they want to resign, and then from there, I think we'll figure it all out. All things considered, we'll head into our first break. Though when we get back, we'll be diving in to mailbag questions. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. BetOnline is who covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march to the playoffs, right to the big game in a couple weeks. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline is up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. It's our second segment of this Wednesday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher is still here with you. And we're gonna talk about these mailbag questions here. Again, we have 4 of them, and we're going to dive into 2 of them here and 2 of them in the final segment. So let's take to Twitter. Let's get into this mailbag and first ask or talk about a question from JL, who says, forget about the Greg Roman talk. We already know he's public enemy number 1 for Ravens flock. I want to know about this draft and what approach should the Ravens take? Ajabo, Sauce, O-lineman, who's best value for 14? Well, yes, Greg Roman, that talk, John Harbaugh, pretty much put it to rest. I mean, he left the door open a little bit in terms of, is there going to be a change? Yeah, but he said he expects him back and he's excited about it. So, we'll see, but it seems really likely that Greg Roman is going to be back based off of those comments and just what I expected in general. But yeah, about this draft here, the Ravens, I think, could take multiple approaches because this isn't like a draft where they have like 2 clear specific needs, and then the rest is like, oh, that's kind of secondary, or they don't really need to address that, or they can get this guy on undrafted free agency. No, they have a couple positions, and it's more than a couple that they could easily take in the first round. You talk about offensive line, like offensive tackle, for example, or center, depending on what happens with Bradley Bozeman. You go and you talk about cornerback or safety, depending on who's available. You could take a defensive lineman. You could even take an outside linebacker if you really wanted to because of just the injury to Tyus Bowser and just kind of retooling that group. I know there have been a few people who want a wide receiver in the first round. I'm not there. I think the Ravens have a fine wide receiver group, and to invest a first rounder in a wide receiver when they've already done that 2 of the last 3 drafts, I just don't see that value. I mean, Jameson Williams is great. Chris Olave is great, but Williams is coming off a huge injury, suffered just a couple of weeks ago. And, for Olave, I think that would have been a great pick last year if Rashad Bateman wasn't available, but Bateman was available and Olave decided to return to school. So yeah, I'm kind of honing in on those 4 positions I mentioned: offensive line, defensive line, secondary-ish, and then outside linebacker. That's where I could see them really making a splash at number 14. And the good thing is that it is a very deep class for those positions. And in terms of a couple of the players that JL mentions here, David Ajabo would be great. For me, Ajabo would be amazing, but I feel like he's going to go in the 8 to 12 range. There's a chance he does fall, but I just feel like his stock is already so much on the rise. And I feel like it's going to continue as we go throughout this draft process to the point where I think he might be a top 10 pick when it's all said and done. So the Ravens would have to maybe move up for him. There are a couple of other pass rushers. I mean, the top of this draft class is filled with amazing pass rushers. I mean, Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson, obviously, a couple of others who could really do some good things early on in their NFL careers. But I think for me, my favorite realistic target, because there's no way the Ravens are getting Thibodeau or Hutchinson, I think that Ajabo is my favorite edge rush target. Sauce Gardner, as JL mentions, is another one. The cornerback position around where the Ravens draft, I think they're in a pretty good spot there, actually, because we don't really know how that's going to shake out. There are a bunch of top-tier cornerbacks who are probably going to go in like the 7 to 23 range or something, like Andrew Booth Jr., Sauce Gardner, obviously, Derek Stingley Jr. You have like 3 or 4 really good cornerbacks who you could make an argument could be all top 20 picks or top 25 picks. I mean, Trent McDuffie is there as well, who really is, he's a good guy overall. I mean, Daxton Hill's kind of a do-it-all player, and Roger McCreary from Auburn is, I mean, this is a really, really deep cornerback class. But the thing about it is it's not necessarily like, oh, there's talent in all 7 rounds. There is, but it's not like, oh, well, the first round is like, and then the second round is a little better. No, there are like 5 or 6 or 7 corners who could realistically go in this first round. I think if the Ravens really wanted to draft a cornerback at number 14, they will have their choice of guys, whether it's Stingley or Gardner or McDuffie or Booth or whoever. They have options. And if 1 or 2 of them are gone by 14, I wouldn't sweat it if I were them, if they really had a guy, because to me, I think that Gardner, I think that Booth, I think that Stingley, I think that those guys are all 100% just, I'd be completely fine with that. I'd love the pick if those 3 were the pick at number 14. Offensive linemen, there are some good options. I mean, Tyler Linderbaum is obviously the top center in this draft, and there's been a lot of controversy about how high should you pick a center. Obviously, again, a lot of it does depend for the Ravens on if Bradley Bozeman stays or if he goes. But, we don't want to, at least myself, I don't want to go back to an era where we had the 2020 Matt Skura and Patrick McCary that had Lamar Jackson looking like Odell Beckham with the one-hand snags and the jump snaps he had to take. So I think having a center, a quality one, was very, very important. Offensive tackle, you do have options. I mean, they're the top flight guys like Evan Neal and those types, but kind of in that area. I mean, Ikem Ekwonu is somebody who he is my dream pick for the Ravens. I know there are other people who share that with me. He is so good. He is so versatile, nasty streak. I mean, those are all players who I think would be amazing. Or Ekwonu, but yeah, you talk about Booth, you talk about Gardner and all those other guys. Offensive tackle, it's interesting because there have been rumblings of like Trevor Penning over there, and we'll talk about this in a minute actually with another mailbag question. But I think that for the Ravens, you could do that. And then the defensive line, there's Trayvon Walker, there's Jordan Davis. You have a bunch of other options. DeMarvin Leal is there. So those 4 positions, there are options. But we have to remember, Eric DeCosta does like maneuvering up and down the draft board. So, you could look at number 14 is Eric DeCosta saying, hey, look, we love a guy who we didn't think was going to be there at 10. Let's trade one of our 10 draft picks along with 14 to get up there and take this guy. Like if Ekwonu falls, or if Kyle Hamilton or like one of those guys falls, you have a armory of draft picks that you could trade for that. And even trading back if DeCosta wants to pick up an extra 3rd that he can move up in the 2nd round with or something like that, there are options for that for sure. And then our next question here, it's going to come from Devin, and he asks, should we adjust the defensive line in free agency? If so, who could be some options for free agency? And so, yeah, Devin, this is a good question, because for what the Ravens have on the defensive line right now, it's, they have talent. Like Justin Madubuike, I think is going to be very, very good in this league for a very, very long time. Broderick Washington, I was very impressed with, but Calais Campbell, free agent. You have Derek Wolfe, who, what is he going to be like after his hip surgery? We don't really know right now. He was great in 2020, but missed the whole 2021 season. Brandon Williams, free agent. Justin Ellis, free agent. So I think that the Ravens should definitely look to free agency, whether that is bringing back one of their guys like Calais Campbell or Brandon Williams, or even Justin Ellis if you want a cheaper veteran there. But there are other options. I love Larry Ogunjobi of Cincinnati. I think I loved him going back to his Cleveland days. He's somebody who I think could really fit this defense very well. He's only 27 years old. He'll turn 28 before the 2022 season begins, but that's great. I mean, other than that, you have like Akeem Hicks is probably the top guy on this market. Calais Campbell is also up there as well. I mean, BJ Hill for Cincinnati's come on in a really, really big way. There's Linval Joseph and like Sebastian Joseph Day. So, if the Ravens aren't going to make that huge splash with like an Akeem Hicks type player, I think bringing back Campbell and whatever this new Ravens defensive scheme could look like if he does decide to play again would be great. And then maybe picking up if it's like Campbell and Ogunjobi or like Williams and Ogunjobi, you can figure out how these guys can fit on the field together. I know some skill sets are redundant and whatnot, but I think that identifying these needs are going to be really important for the Ravens in terms of what they prioritize when and just how high on the priority list they are. Because we could be talking here for weeks about, this offensive line is the number 1 priority for them. And then the Ravens all of a sudden say, well, it is, but in free agency, we're really not going to do anything. And kind of along those lines, and they're going to sign a defensive back and sign a defensive lineman. So I think the Ravens have room for one decently big free agent splash if they really want to make it, if they really wanted to figure out how to make the money work and everything. And then they can also go and do their thing with like the thing we saw last offseason with signing Justin Houston late and signing Sammy Watkins, and they love their compensatory picks, obviously, so they'll kind of try to milk that formula as we've seen in the past before. But I think this is a very pivotal offseason for the Ravens, for Eric DeCosta, and I think he understands that. It's not like he's going into this offseason saying like, oh, our 2021 season was great, like we're just going to bring all our guys back and run it back. No, he knows that the draft is huge, but free agency is also very huge. And the Ravens aren't a team that's going to like spend a ton anyway and sign a bunch of outside guys anyway. They trust their guys from the inside. They're going to lose some guys, definitely. They probably can't retain everybody. And I'm going to rephrase that. They cannot retain everybody that is going to enter free agency, but they have options. And I think the defensive line is a key point to really have a successful year for the Ravens in 2022. We'll let into our final break. Then when we get back, we'll be diving into our final 2 mailbag questions. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back. It's the New Year's, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthy, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. So there are so many flavors to choose from. So if you go to BuiltBar.com, use promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off of your order. Just use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back here. It's our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. We're not going to dive into a couple more mailbag questions, starting off with Positive Vibes 0611, who says, #Fire Roman is over. Where should I set my expectation for the offseason? So, yes, again, the comments John Harbaugh made pretty much all but confirmed that Greg Roman will be back for this team, at least for the start of 2022, which is in line with what I was expecting with the injuries that this team went through. But now, in terms of where to focus kind of attention this offseason, I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm also realistic, kind of a rhyme there. But you look at that and just what this team can do to upgrade, where they can upgrade. We talked about some of the needs they already had, like with the offensive line. Obviously, that's where they need to start. And John Harbaugh talked about that on Monday in his press conference. I mean, we kind of shared the same mindset, him and I, about it doesn't matter how good your skill position players are, your quarterback, whoever. If you cannot block, not a lot of good things are going to happen. So you got to get well in the trenches, both on offense and on defense. We talked about the defensive line in the second segment there. I think that's very, very important. But I also wouldn't necessarily put your expectations super high that they're going to go out there and make like a huge free agent signing. I think if they were going to make like a huge splash, it would probably be via trade where they understand they have a ton of draft picks to work with. We've seen them make offseason acquisitions before for players. We've seen them make steals of acquisitions. Calais Campbell, for example, was a huge steal in the 2020 offseason. So I'm kind of look at where the Ravens are cap-wise. You can add a player in a deal if you really want to move off a salary and kind of get a guy back with a pick or 2 picks or whatnot. It can work there. But I do think the Ravens have to be a bit more aggressive this offseason. And not to say they haven't been before and that, they don't take risks, because they do. But, this isn't like the Rams are trading all their picks away from Matthew Stafford and Jalen Ramsey and Von Miller and whoever. So it's not quite that type of risk. Baltimore, I don't think, is ever going to be that team or ever going to operate under that mentality, at least under the current regime they have right now, which is fine. I mean, I agree with that. But I think that there is a balance between being too conservative with your draft picks and being too aggressive with them in terms of where to trade them, how to trade them. I understand that this Ravens team really likes to have the whole, well, if you swing enough, you're going to hit one eventually. And yeah, that's accurate. I'm not saying that's a wrong strategy, but there's a balance of having the veterans, a balance of having the rookies and the second year of the youngins. And I think for the Ravens, they are in a situation now where they have that Lamar Jackson contract extension coming up. They understand what that's going to be like. And I expect a deal to get done. I'd be pretty shocked if it doesn't, even if they have to franchise tag him 1 or 2 years here down the line. But, it seems like both parties want it. I've said that before. So that's one thing to keep in mind. They're paying Ronnie Stanley $100 million. They're paying Marlon Humphrey $100 million. So they have money on the books here for a while. So they don't have the necessary freedom to go out there and sign 20 free agents like the Texans did or like the Patriots did last offseason. I know people want to see that. They want to see the flurry of moves that the Ravens make in free agency and on day 1 and day 2, but they just never really operate that way. They maybe make one or two like Zeitler in the first 2 days, and then they kind of lay back, let the free agent market play out, and see who's left and see what other teams need and kind of try to capitalize on that in general. So we could see more of a strategy shift here for Baltimore, but I am interested to see how it turns out. And then just moving forward, just the health of this team is really important. John Harbaugh did talk about that and all the extensive conversations he's had, but where I'm putting my focus this offseason is, look, this team was not at full strength in the slightest in 2021. So the fact that they'll be able to hopefully get guys at full strength back like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Ronnie Stanley, Marcus Peters, Lamar Jackson, obviously, and some of those other guys, it's going to be huge. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to see how that all plays out. Finally here, we're going to take a look at a question from Mark Lewis on YouTube, and he asks, if the Ravens draft an offensive lineman in the first round, who do you think it will be? If not the first, who would you like in the second or later rounds? I think we have to assume Stanley and James aren't going to play, so we just err on the side of caution and don't run into the situation we faced last season. I think if we draft a first-round left tackle, the Ravens can then have Cleveland at left guard, re-sign Bozeman at center unless they sign an upgrade through free agency, Zeitler at right guard, and then sign an upper-end right tackle through free agency or roll with McCurry. Thoughts? So yeah, this is a great question, kind of multi-layered, and so I'll dive into all of them. So first, if the Ravens have an offensive lineman in the first, who do I think it will be? And if not in the first, who would you like in the second and later round? So yeah, I kind of talked about this a little bit. So Ikem Ekwonu is my dream, but I think he goes top 5, honestly, so I don't think that's going to be in play for them. There are other options, though. I mean, Charles Cross is someone who I've seen him go everywhere in mock drafts. I see him more in like the 11 to 17 range, so that isn't an option for the Ravens. I could see him going earlier than that as well. Trevor Penning I talked about. Yeah, Bernhard Raimann, who is a really interesting like guard tackle hybrid who could do that. Darian Kinnard is great. Nicholas Petit-Frere is awesome. Daniel Falele from Minnesota, huge 380-pound tackle, 6'9" guy, just massive athlete. There are good ones. Sean Ryan is another one. Zion Johnson, who's a guard and could even, slip out the tackle if you wanted to. Maybe in some situations could help out, but there are options in the first and second rounds where I think once you hit past the Cross and like Kenyon Green's almost, and Evan Neal, obviously he's not going to be available. Maybe you trade back for a guy like Trevor Penning if there is an option there, but Darian Kinnard to me, Petit-Frere, Raymond, they're guys who are like late first, early second guys to me. So if I'm looking at an offensive tackle, there are good options. Like Charles Cross would be great. I think, though, that we could see the Ravens pick like a second-round tackle and maybe trade up in the second round for a tackle where you could get a guy like Kinnard, and that would be awesome. Jackson Kirkland would have been awesome, but he opted out of the draft, so that's not going to be an option for them anymore. So there are options for the Ravens there, but I think that in terms of building their offensive line, as I did talk about, it's very, very important. And even guys like Abraham Lucas are very good, and guys who are coming from smaller schools. I would not be shocked to see the Ravens double dip at tackle and just kind of go that route, because I agree they should not bank on the health of Ronnie Stanley again. And if you're talking about Jawan James, that as well, you should take the cautious approach. I definitely agree with that. In terms of drafting a first-round left tackle, I think I would rephrase that and say if it is a first-round tackle, somebody who is a hybrid left tackle, right tackle type player who, I think that I'd much rather have them have more right tackle experience, in my opinion, just because, you never know with this Ronnie Stanley injury. You really do never know, but you have to put some trust. The issue with the Ravens last year was they put too much trust into Stanley and kind of what that was doing. So the Ravens put pretty much all their eggs in that Ronnie Stanley basket. It did not work out. I think you can put some eggs in the Ronnie Stanley basket, but also say, hey, look, if you can play right tackle and if that's your primary position, that's awesome. But if you can play left tackle at a high level too, in the event that Ronnie Stanley can't come back or has to miss more time in 2022, then that is a huge, huge plus. I also think that, yeah, if you look at Patrick McCary, Jawan James, I think Patrick McCary is the perfect, sixth offensive lineman who can play all 5 positions. I think that is where he is best at. He showed that he's a great offensive tackle. He's great at that. But I think having a guy who can play all 5 positions like McCary is really good. So then Mark says that the Ravens could have Cleveland at left guard, re-sign Bozeman at center, Zeitler at right guard, and then, the upper end right tackle through free agency. The issue with that is the upper end right tackles, they cost a lot. Offensive linemen cost a ton in free agency, and the Ravens don't have a massive amount to work with and won't have a massive amount to work with, especially as they go through trying to sign their own guys. So for what the Ravens have in terms of cap space, I don't think a tackle, at least a significant upgrade type guy, is going to be on their radar because just they don't have the funds to kind of give that money out based off the other needs that they have. But in terms of Bozeman, I think that he could get his market is weird to me. I think he could get a ton of money, and I think someone will pay him a lot. But there's a possibility that his market isn't as what he might expect it to be. That's more like the smaller chance to me. I think the bigger chance is he gets paid a lot of money. So if Bozeman isn't re-signed, then you're talking about, hey, is Linderbaum the option at 14? There's so much to unpack this offseason. I'm really excited to continue talking about it here on Locked On Ravens. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens talk, of course. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.